One of the most significant economies in the world is that of China. Not only because of its immense size, but also due to the influence it has on the area. The way it interacts with other economies around the world, its sizable foreign exchange reserves, its questionable foreign policies, and of course its population, which accounts for a fifth of all people on the planet. Even if China's economy weren't the second largest in the world, it would still draw a lot of attention because of how directly it affects our daily lives. Although our economic dependence on China, which may or may not like to acknowledge, is beginning to diminish, it is still present, and for this reason, the accuracy and dependability of their economic data are factors that are very serious impact on how we run our own economies. Different governmental levels may manipulate China's economic data to convey a more rosy picture of Chinese economic development. Anything from exaggerating output figures to falsifying employment data could fall under this category. Different layers of government in China would attempt to do this for very obvious reasons. It's also critical to note that falsifying economic statistics is not by any means a China-specific issue. However, it has the second largest economy in the world and more international recognition than any other nation. What evidence is there then that China is fabricating its economic data? Welcome to the Financial Flow. Please like and subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay up on our latest videos. It might be challenging to assess the relevance of data. All levels of government in China have a very clear motivation to select individuals who project a better image. The inaccuracies can compound on one another and result in net results that are off by a very large margin if those points are transmitted up the ranks to be combined into national figures. Beyond that, it is difficult to acquire GDP figures. I think it's worth mentioning that the World Bank tracks the ability of all countries to create reliable economic numbers using the statistical capacity score. China's score has historically been below average. In 2004, it was in the 38th percentile among low and middle income nations, and in 2015, it was in the 52nd percentile. However, China was ranked in the 83rd percentile in the 2016 rankings, which means that just 17% of low and middle income countries were able to produce more accurate totals than it did. In China, corruption has been reported to occur. Therefore, a large economy like China must deal with a very complex set of data that is gathered and analyzed by multiple levels of government employees. It is understandable why the figures have lost their credibility. The compounding effective numbers that are reported each year must also be taken into account. A paper titled Quality of China's GDP Statistics by Stanford University researcher Karsten Holz examined the accuracy of China's GDP statistics. It was argued in a now outdated paper that after falsifying one report, leaders found it difficult to return to accurate figures because doing so would require them to report growth that was lower than the actual rate in order to restore the level of output. If you are a local government leader who has unintentionally or knowingly exaggerated your output figures by 1% in a year, you will need to add an additional 1% to the data for the next year, or else it will appear that you have made a reverse progress. If you continue doing this, eventually, the difference between the correct figures and last year's figures will be so wide that reporting the correct figures will result in such a sharp decline that it will prompt an investigation. Even if the officials didn't want to outright report false data at that point, continuing to do so would be in their best interest because the punishment would probably be harsh. This is the crucial thing right now. This issue was acknowledged by the Chinese government as early as the 1990s. Famously, a prominent Chinese government official publicly acknowledged that GDP figures were entirely artificial in a leaked comment. International organizations and even the Chinese government no longer use data gathered by province governments to construct national output estimates without first making changes to account for the pattern of overinflated figures as a result of this systemic issue. The issue therefore arises from the fact that the National Bureau of Statistics of China publicly acknowledges that it makes optional adjustments to its statistics, while offering no additional openness regarding these adjustments. The American Federal Reserve's Research Division has claimed that this lack of openness is worse than the flagrantly incorrect numbers because it is more difficult to determine what those adjustments were. Therefore, it is clear to most economists that Chinese economic estimates are untrustworthy and are overstated rather than underestimated due to a mix of data gathering challenges, ineptitude, corruption, and purposeful manipulation. The next issue is how to improve our estimates. A variety of additional data points that may be monitored without the assistance, or more crucially, influence of governmental institutions are highly connected with the output of an economy. Electricity consumption, rail cargo volume, and bank lending were the only three metrics Li Keqiang used to assess the economy after he very candidly acknowledged that the Communist Party GDP figures were made up. An economy is almost likely producing more production if it is utilizing more electricity, transporting more freight through rail, and lending more money to different projects. The advantage of employing these data points is that they are centralized, making them simple to collect and very difficult to manipulate. Consumption of electricity is calculated straight from the grid. Tracking of arriving and departing containers is necessary in rail yards. Additionally, banks want to be certain that they are maintaining accurate records of the people who owe money. If you are a high-ranking CCP officer, this is fantastic news. Asking a Chinese state-owned bank for a detailed breakdown of their new domestic lending activities isn't going to go over well with a foreign economist. This indicates that even if no one outside the party sees the figures, they are still vulnerable to manipulation. However, there are other data sources that, while undoubtedly worse, are much simpler to gather. The measurement of a nation's nighttime light output using satellite photography is a common technique. According to the theory, a nation will emit less radiation when there is greater economic activity. All forms of lighting, including those on roads, in factories, on cars, and even in stadiums, are directly related to economic productivity. Thus, the GDP increases as light levels do. Many of you are probably already considering issues with this system. For instance, in addition to pure economic activity, there are numerous other factors that influence light output. Naturally, a nation with a higher population will require more lights. When compared to a nation that generates the majority of its value through the service sector, a country with more heavy industry will use more light. Even cultural variations in how bright city dwellers desire their neighborhoods can alter light output. In a paper on this idea, Louis Martinez, an economist at the University of Chicago, indicated that China's modest output increase over the preceding decades was insufficient to be consistent with the reported growth in overall economic output. He also discovered that, when measured using light output as an indicator of growth, autocratic governments in general tend to overstate their actual economic figures by an average of 35%. The same report continued to contend that estimates of China's growth between 1993 and 2012 may have been doubled. Martinez did take into account the variation between the nations he studied in a way that has stood up to extensive peer review. Therefore, it is evident that communist countries tend to prioritize providing electricity. Martinez was aware of this issue and wasn't seriously arguing for the use of telescopes by international bodies as opposed to official statistics. But he did present it as an amazingly effective verification check. The crucial point is that each of these alternate methods for calculating GDP growth can be used to confirm or cast doubt on various estimates. But even they have trouble producing precise estimations. In most cases, that's truly adequate. GDP metrics don't mean nearly as much as you might believe they do to actual decision makers or even the economies themselves, because it may directly enhance living standards for the majority of people in the economy. GDP growth is so greatly desired. Therefore, GDP growth triumphs over a host of other issues. The GDP figures are merely the ones that make the news, and even though output may be rising, living standards and economic clout may be declining. People are willing to put up with a lot if they believe their wealth is expanding. Look no further than China to observe this counterintuitive trend in action. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Have a good one.